She had grown used to being overlooked. In the hangars of the Air Force Academy, men in polished boots and pressed uniforms walked past her as though she were invisible. She was short, quiet, and her presence did not demand attention the way others did. Her name was Elena Cross, and though her instructors noted her precision in mechanics and her flawless test scores in aeronautics, few ever thought she would do anything remarkable. She was the kind of person everyone expected to graduate quietly, take an unimportant role, and fade into the background of history. But Elena had a secret that none of them could see when they glanced at her. A hunger that burned hotter than the turbines of any jet she had ever studied. That hunger was not for recognition, not even for glory, but for the chance to prove to herself that she belonged in the skies, where her spirit had always longed to be. The academy had a legend, whispered about between trainees and even discussed in hushed tones by instructors. It was the Black Talon, a jet built years ago during an experimental program that had nearly bankrupted the division. The aircraft was sleek and monstrous, designed to push beyond human tolerance. Its wings curved like the talons of a hawk, its engines produced a scream that rattled bones, and its control systems were notoriously unstable. Every pilot who had attempted to master it had either failed or sworn never to touch it again. 2 test pilots had died during its trials, and after that, the Black Talon was grounded permanently. It sat in the corner of Hangar 17 like a ghost, covered in dust, a reminder of ambition that had gone too far. The instructors used it as a cautionary tale. Know your limits, they would say. Don't end up like the ones who thought they could fly the Talon. For Elena, however, the jet was not a ghost but a challenge. Every time she walked past that hangar, she felt the machine calling to her, daring her to try what no one else dared. Her fascination had begun when she first read the flight reports. Late at night, when the others laughed in the mess hall or slept off exhaustion, she pored over the Talon's schematics. The numbers didn't intimidate her. The violent stalling patterns, the uncontrollable yaw beyond Mach 2, the unpredictable G-forces. All the factors that terrified others became puzzles in her mind. She could see solutions where others saw only chaos. She imagined modifications, subtle adjustments in technique, and most of all, a way to connect with the jet rather than fight it. Flying was not about brute force, she believed. It was about listening, to the air, to the machine, to the rhythm of the sky. If she could listen, perhaps she could hear what the Black Talon had been trying to say all along. But no one cared for her theories. When she tried to voice them, her peers dismissed her with smirks, and her instructors gently urged her to focus on practical aircraft. Practical meant safe. Practical meant boring. And Elena had no intention of living a practical life. Her chance came unexpectedly during a training exercise. A storm rolled in over the mountains, grounding half the fleet. One by one, the scheduled flights were cancelled. But the general overseeing the base that week was not interested in excuses. He wanted to see initiative. Who among you is ready to prove themselves when the conditions are not ideal? He demanded in the briefing room. Silence followed. No one wanted to volunteer, not with lightning splitting the sky and the winds threatening to tear apart even the strongest aircraft. Elena sat quietly, heart pounding, knowing this was her moment. She raised her hand. The room erupted in laughter. Some thought she was joking. Others thought she was insane. But the general did not laugh. His eyes narrowed on her, and after a long pause he said, "Very well, Cadet Cross. Let's see if your courage matches your confidence." But when they brought her to the flight line, fate twisted in a way no one expected. The only jet left serviceable in the chaos of the storm was the Black Talon. Every other aircraft had been either secured or damaged. The mechanics shook their heads. The instructors whispered protests. "It's suicide," one said. "She won't last 5 minutes." The general silenced them with a raised hand. His voice was calm, almost cruel. "Then let her be the one to prove it." Elena stared at the Talon as lightning illuminated its dark frame. Her pulse quickened, but not from fear. She had dreamed of this moment too many times to hesitate now. The jet was waiting and she would answer. For once she wasn't overlooked. Every eye was on her as she climbed into the cockpit, strapped herself in, and ran her fingers over the controls she had memorized in secret hours of study. She felt the machine's anger, its unpredictability, but also its promise. The storm roared, the general watched, and the academy held its breath. Elena whispered under her breath, not to the crowd, not to herself, but to the jet itself, "Let's fly." The canopy closed above her, sealing her into a cocoon of rain, thunder, and metal. For a moment, Elena sat in silence, the cockpit dimly lit by the glow of the instruments. The Black Talon's controls were alive beneath her hands, humming faintly, as though the jet itself remembered what it once was. She had studied its system so often that she could feel where others had gone wrong. They had fought it, wrestled against its power. But she had no intention of forcing it into obedience. She would flow with it the way a river moved with its banks. Outside, the storm screamed, pelting the canopy with heavy sheets of rain. The crew chief looked up at her through the glass with a face pale as ash. He tapped twice on the fuselage, the signal that all checks were green. The others stood further back, expecting to watch a tragedy unfold. Elena inhaled slowly, steadied her pulse, and pushed the ignition. The engines roared to life like a beast waking from years of slumber. The ground vibrated beneath her, and the air shimmered with heat as the turbines spun to full power. The sound alone was enough to make cadets cover their ears. The talon shook, straining like it wanted to leap forward before it was even cleared for taxi. Lightning arced across the clouds above, illuminating the black sheen of the jet. Elena's hands were steady, her eyes locked on the runway stretching ahead into darkness and storm. Cadet Cross, the tower crackled over the comms, their voices tinged with fear. You are not authorized for this flight. Repeat, you are not authorized. Before they could finish, the general's deeper voice cut across. Authorization granted. Let her go. Gasps echoed in the control room. No one argued further. No one dared. Elena eased the throttle forward, and the talon rolled down the taxiway. Every raindrop felt like a drumbeat on the fuselage. She could sense the tension of the crowd behind her, cadets holding their breath, instructors already preparing reports for the disaster they were certain was about to happen. But Elena wasn't thinking about them. She wasn't thinking about failure. She was listening, to the way the engines surged, to the vibrations in the stick, to the subtle resistance in the pedals beneath her feet. She had studied these signs, memorized their language. The black talon wasn't fighting her. It was testing her. She spoke back with calm precision, adjusting her inputs like notes in a symphony. By the time she lined up with the runway, the fear had melted into a sharp, almost ecstatic focus. The storm loomed like a wall of darkness ahead, but she was no longer afraid of it. The sky was where she belonged. She slammed the throttle open, and the talon screamed forward. Acceleration pressed her deep into the seat, the instruments blurring with speed. The rain tried to drag her down, but the engines cut through with merciless power. The runway lights flickered by in streaks until the nose lifted, and with a smooth, defiant pull, Elena tore the black talon off the ground. The jet leapt into the storm like a predator unleashed, vanishing from the eyes of the stunned crowd in seconds. The hangars, the runway, the rows of cadets, they fell away beneath her as she soared upward into chaos. The moment the wheels left the earth, Elena felt something she had never felt in her life: complete belonging. The talon did not buck her off, did not collapse under stress. It embraced the air with her, dangerous and alive, daring her to push further. The storm swallowed her whole. Thunder cracked so loud it rattled her helmet. Sheets of rain hammered the canopy, turning the outside world into a blur. Crosswinds struck like invisible fists, shoving the jet sideways. But Elena did not fight against them. She adjusted, flowing into the turbulence, correcting with subtle, patient moves. The talon snarled in response, engines roaring like they wanted to break free of physics itself. Easy, she whispered as though soothing a wild animal. For a terrifying instant, the jet rolled sharply, almost flipping inverted as a downdraft dragged it down. Any other pilot might have panicked, yanking the controls in desperation. Elena did not. She breathed, adjusted her grip, and let the talon ride the current until it leveled again. Her heart raced, but her mind was calm, every sense locked into the rhythm of survival. Down below in the control tower, chaos reigned. Radar blips showed the talon vanishing and reappearing as the storm interfered. Cadets shouted over one another. Some begged for the general to recall her. Others demanded they cut the comms before they had to hear her last words. But the general stood with arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Wait," he said. "Just wait." His gaze never left the storm beyond the windows, as if he could see her through the blackness. The instructors muttered among themselves that this was criminal, reckless. But deep down, even they felt a strange pull, a gnawing suspicion that something unprecedented was unfolding in the skies above them. Inside the cockpit, Elena's confidence grew with each second she remained airborne. The talon responded to her touch in ways it never had for the others. It wasn't perfect. The turbulence threw her violently, alarms flared red on the console, and the engines howled in protest, but she understood it. For every threat the storm hurled, she found a rhythm with the jet to counter it. She pulled higher, chasing a break in the clouds where moonlight teased through the storm. Lightning lit the cockpit, making her face glow with determination. She whispered again, almost prayer-like, "We can do this." The Talon surged upward, obeying. The storm screamed in rage, but Elena screamed louder, her voice lost in the roar of engines as she pierced into the black sky. And then, as if rewarding her defiance, the clouds broke. The Talon burst through the ceiling of the storm, and suddenly the night opened wide, clear, infinite, and glowing with stars. The rain and lightning vanished beneath her, leaving only silence and the endless heavens. Elena gasped, overwhelmed by the beauty. The Talon leveled smoothly, no longer fighting, no longer bucking. For the first time in years the cursed jet flew steady. Down below, no one could see her, but Elena knew. She had done the impossible. The silence above the storm felt unreal, as though she had broken not just through weather but through the very wall of doubt that had surrounded her since she first set foot in the academy. The stars glittered like shards of glass scattered across velvet darkness, and the moonlight painted the black Talon in silver. Elena took a deep breath, her lungs filling with the cool, dry air of the stratosphere. Down below, lightning still raged, but it was powerless now, locked beneath the barrier of clouds. For the first time she could feel the Talon not as a threat, but as an extension of herself. The stick moved in her hand with the faintest touch, as though the machine trusted her in return. She smiled for the first time since the canopy closed. She was no longer proving anything to the general or the cadets or the instructors. She was proving it to herself. She was meant for this sky. Back in the control tower, disbelief had settled into silence. The radar confirmed what their eyes could not. The Talon had climbed beyond the storm and was holding steady at an altitude no one believed it could reach without catastrophic stall. The technicians muttered in awe, staring at their screens. "Impossible," one whispered. "She should have blacked out from the GS." Another shook his head, unable to explain the data. The cadets pressed to the windows as if expecting her to streak back down in flames, but nothing came. Minutes passed and still no disaster. The general's lips curved in the faintest smile, though his eyes remained sharp, calculating. He had gambled on her when no one else would, and it seemed his gamble was paying off. Elena tested the controls cautiously, banking the Talon left and right, dipping its nose slightly then pulling it back. The jet responded smoother than she expected, though every adjustment carried weight, like taming a predator with every gesture. She remembered the failed reports, the notes of other pilots describing sudden stalls and uncontrollable rolls. Instead of brute-forcing maneuvers, she tried something different. She let the jet tell her what it wanted. She sensed where resistance grew, where it felt natural to push further, and where it demanded patience. When she rolled into a wide arc, the stars tilted around her in breathtaking silence, the jet holding steady as though it were alive. "You're not cursed," she whispered into the canopy, her voice barely audible even to herself. "You just needed someone to listen." Down below, the storm began to break apart, revealing glimpses of the Talon as it glided high above. Gasps filled the airfield as cadets caught sight of its silhouette against the moon. They had seen it once as a dusty relic in the hangar, but now, alive and in motion, it looked like something out of legend, sleek, dangerous, untouchable. A hush fell over them. Even the instructors, who had mocked her for arrogance, could no longer deny what they were witnessing. "She's flying it," one muttered, astonished. "She's actually flying it." Another crossed his arms, refusing to admit what was plain, that the overlooked cadet had done what none of them had dared. Elena pulled the Talon into a climb, testing its engines further. The roar vibrated through her bones as the nose angled upward, stars sliding lower in her canopy. Her stomach sank as gravity tugged, but she held steady, letting the jet stretch its wings in ways it had never been allowed before. Alarms blinked on her console, warning of stress on the frame, but she didn't flinch. She knew exactly how far she could go. At 35,000 feet, she leveled again, the world below reduced to a swirling ocean of cloud. She felt untouchable, not because the jet was perfect but because she was finally in harmony with it. Every second in the cockpit was a dialogue, a negotiation. And the more she listened, the more the Talon gave in return. The comms crackled to life, a voice sharp with static. "Cadet Cross, respond. Report your status." She hesitated, almost forgetting that others still existed outside this perfect silence. "This is Cross," she replied calmly, her voice steadier than she expected. "Altitude 35,000, holding stable. Systems nominal." The line went silent for several seconds, as if the tower itself could not believe what they had just heard. Then another voice broke in, hurried, urgent. "Cross, bring it back down. Immediately." "That's an order." She could hear the panic beneath the command, the fear of losing her after she had already defied every expectation. But another voice cut through, deep and firm, the general. Negative. Let her continue. The words silenced every protest in the room. For the first time, Elena felt the weight of his faith on her shoulders, not as a burden but as fuel. She wasn't just defying them anymore, she was showing them what could be done when someone dared. With careful precision, she eased the talon into a dive, testing its stability under stress. The engines howled, the hull trembled, but she kept her movements fluid, not overcorrecting as the air screamed past. The G-forces pressed her back, blurring her vision, but she breathed evenly, resisting the tunnel of black that threatened to close in. The talon rode the dive like a predator hunting, alive and feral but controlled in her grip. She pulled up smoothly, and the jet obeyed, leveling out without the violent lurches that had doomed so many before her. She grinned despite herself, adrenaline burning in her veins. She had not tamed the beast completely, but she had earned its respect. When she finally leveled at cruising altitude again, sweat trickled down her neck, her pulse pounding in her ears. She knew she couldn't stay aloft forever. The talon's fuel was limited and the storm still lingered below. But she also knew something else, something undeniable. The black talon was not impossible. It was waiting for someone willing to understand it, to trust it. And she was that someone. As she guided the jet into a wide arc above the academy, she caught sight of the lights below, tiny and insignificant. For the first time in her life, she was not overlooked. Every eye was on her, not in mockery, not in pity, but in awe. She had done the unthinkable. And she wasn't done yet. The longer she remained in the air, the more the black talon seemed to change beneath her hands. It no longer felt like a relic locked in the shadows of a hangar but like a living creature stretching muscles that had long been bound. Elena felt it straining, eager for more, as though the storm and the climb were not challenges but warm-ups. Her heart pounded as she realized what it was asking. To go faster, higher, further than anyone had believed possible. She knew she should return, that she had already done enough to secure her place in the Academy's history. But something in her refused to stop. All her life she had been overlooked, dismissed, told to aim for the practical and the safe. Now, for the first time, the universe had given her the chance to define her limits, and she would not cut them short. The general's voice came through the comms again, steady but firm. Cadet Cross, you've proven your point. You will descend and land immediately. For a moment, Elena almost obeyed. The weight of authority was not easy to shrug off. But as her hand hovered over the throttle, she felt the hum of the engines beneath her, the jet vibrating with potential. She thought of all the reports she had read late at night, the lines that always ended in failure because no one had pushed beyond the fear. If she turned back now, the talon would remain a cursed ghost forever, remembered only as a mistake. If she pressed forward, even at the risk of her life, she could rewrite its story, and hers. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, then whispered, "Not yet." Her fingers tightened on the stick and she pushed the throttle forward. The acceleration slammed her into the seat as the talon leapt ahead, a streak of black slicing through the night. The engine screamed louder than thunder, every gauge on her panel pushing toward the red. Warnings blared, but she silenced them with a flick of a switch. Fear tried to claw at her chest, but adrenaline smothered it. She had studied the talon's failure points. She knew where the others had panicked, where they had tried to force it to obey like a machine instead of trusting it like a partner. She would not make their mistake. As the jet tore through the sky, Mach numbers ticking upward, Elena surrendered herself to the rhythm. Every vibration in the fuselage, every flicker on the gauges she absorbed and adjusted to like notes in music. She wasn't controlling the talon, she was flying with it. Down below, the control tower exploded with shouts. "She's accelerating past Mach 2. She'll tear the frame apart. She won't survive the stress." The instructors shouted over each other, horrified as the numbers climbed on their screens. But the general stood motionless, eyes locked on the radar. His jaw tightened, but he did not speak. Deep down he understood what she was doing. He recognized that spark, the refusal to stop at good enough. It was the same drive he had seen in Legends, in the few pilots who became myths in their own time. Whether she survived or not, Cadet Cross had already crossed into a realm few dared to enter. Still, he could not deny the fear in his chest as the comms filled with static and alarms screamed across the consoles. Elena gritted her teeth as the G-forces pressed harder, tunneling her vision, turning the stars into streaks. The talon shuddered violently, warning her that one wrong move could shatter them both into burning fragments. But instead of fear, she felt clarity. She had memorized this moment from simulations, from failed reports, from diagrams that had always ended in disaster. The key was not to fight the instability but to ride it, to move with the oscillations rather than against them. She adjusted her grip, applying pressure in tiny, patient bursts, coaxing the talon into stability. The jet responded, still wild but no longer frantic, like a beast recognizing a rider worthy of its back. The Mach indicator ticked higher, the roar of the engines blending with the rush of her own pulse until she could not tell where she ended and the talon began. Then, suddenly she broke through. The vibrations smoothed, the screaming alarms quieted, and the cockpit filled with a new kind of silence, terrifying in its calm. Elena glanced at the gauges and saw what no one had ever seen before. The black talon was flying steady at Mach 3. Her breath caught in her throat. It was not supposed to be possible. The frame should have torn itself apart, the engines should have failed, her body should have blacked out. And yet, here she was, alive, awake, slicing through the sky at speeds humanity had barely dreamed of. She laughed aloud, a raw, triumphant sound that filled the cockpit. "You're not cursed," she shouted, "you're magnificent." The comms buzzed with frantic voices from the tower. They demanded she slow down, that she return immediately, that she stop. Risking the jet, her life, the Academy's reputation. But their words were distant, irrelevant. Elena had left them behind, not just in altitude or speed but in courage. For the first time she wasn't the overlooked cadet, the quiet girl in the corner of the hangar. She was the one rewriting the rules. She was the one the sky belonged to. In the control tower, cadets and instructors alike stared at the monitors in stunned silence, unable to deny what they were seeing. The general alone nodded slowly as though acknowledging not just her defiance, but the inevitability of it. This was not madness. This was destiny. But even destiny had limits. Warning lights returned, glowing brighter as the talon's fuel drained rapidly, its engines screaming from the strain of impossible speed. Elena knew she could not hold this forever. If she pushed further, she risked destroying everything. But if she turned back now, she would carry with her the proof that the black talon was not a failure, not a cursed relic, but a miracle waiting for the right pilot. The thought filled her with pride but also dread. Landing would not be easy. She had taken the jet further than anyone had imagined, but bringing it home without disaster would be the true test. She steadied her breathing, tightened her grip on the controls, and prepared to face the hardest part of all. The return, the decision to descend weighed heavier than the G-forces pressing against her chest. Elena knew that any pilot could take a jet into the sky with adrenaline and stubborn will, but it took mastery to bring it home in one piece. The black talon was still growling under her, its engines strained to their breaking point, fuel gauges sliding down toward the red. Her exhilaration gave way to sober focus. The sky was no longer a playground, it was a battlefield where one mistake meant death. She steadied her breath, eyes flicking over every instrument, memorizing what was still working, what was failing, and what was about to give out. Then she turned the nose downward and the descent began. The instant she dipped into the thicker layers of atmosphere, the talon began to buck like a wild stallion. Air resistance slammed into the frame, the cockpit rattling with a violent urgency that felt like it wanted to tear her apart. The alarms screamed once again, their shrill tones layering over the roar of the engines. Elena bit down hard, her jaw aching, but her hands remained steady. She did not wrestle the jet into submission as others had tried. Instead, she adjusted delicately, riding the violent shifts as though she were surfing waves instead of cutting through air. Every muscle in her body was burning, fighting against gravity, but her mind was locked in sharp clarity. She whispered between clenched teeth, "Easy, easy now, stay with me." Below, the academy grounds were a storm of tension. The cadets crowded against the windows of the tower, their earlier mockery gone, replaced by wide-eyed fear. The instructors who had once dismissed her, now argued frantically over the comms, demanding she abort her descent, pull back, eject, anything but continue. But Elena couldn't eject, not at these speeds, not with the talon bucking so violently. To pull the handle now would mean shredding herself in the turbulence. There was only one path left: land it. The general raised a hand, silencing the storm of voices around him. His gaze stayed locked on the radar, his silence a strange shield around her. Some said he was reckless, even cruel, for letting this continue. But deep down he understood that ordering her to stop would do nothing. Elena was already past the point of obedience. She was making history whether they were ready for it or not. She broke through the last layers of cloud, and the runway stretched out below like a thin ribbon of salvation. Wind gusts battered the jet, cross-currents threatening to shove her off course. She could feel the talon straining, its frame quivering as though it might collapse before it touched the ground. Elena tightened her grip, refusing to let fear seize her. Her training whispered the basics in her mind: reduce throttle, level approach, line with the runway, but the Talon demanded more than textbook precision. She would have to land it the same way she had flown it, by listening. She eased the nose downward, letting the jet's natural momentum guide her path instead of forcing it. The storm winds pushed and she countered gently, trusting the Talon's instincts as though it were alive. The runway lights glowed brighter as she closed in, and for the first time she realized how silent the academy had become. Hundreds of eyes were waiting for her, their breaths held, their doubts forgotten. The final descent was agony. The Talon fought her, every gust threatening to roll her, every vibration warning of collapse. The stick shook violently, nearly ripped from her hand, but she clung to it like lifeline. Her vision narrowed again, the edges darkening, but she blinked hard, refusing to black out. "Come on," she breathed, voice raw, "just a little more." At 200 feet, the crosswinds hit hardest, slamming against the fuselage. The Talon lurched sideways, skidding off alignment. Gasps erupted in the tower. Instructors shouted that she was finished. But Elena did not panic. She adjusted with a subtle correction, not fighting the push but guiding it, letting the wind carry her back toward centerline. The move was insane. Any normal pilot would have overcompensated and spiraled. But somehow, impossibly, the Talon straightened again. At 100 feet, she cut throttle, lowering the nose gently, every nerve in her body tuned to the jet's final movements. The landing gear locked into place with a metallic thud that shook the cockpit. Sparks of lightning lit the field around her, thunder rolling like drums of war. She held her breath. The runway raced up to meet her. Then, impact. The tires slammed against the concrete with bone-shaking force, the entire frame rattling as though it might shatter. The Talon screamed, brakes screeching, the fuselage shuddering as it clawed against momentum. Elena wrestled the stick just enough to keep it from sliding, her arms trembling from the effort. The nose dipped, the jet jolted, then steadied. Slowly, agonizingly, the Talon decelerated, its howl softening until finally, mercifully, it rolled to a stop. For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the world. Elena sat frozen in the cockpit, her chest heaving, sweat soaking her uniform. She could barely feel her arms, her hands locked stiff around the controls. She blinked, unsure if she was still alive, unsure if this was real. Then the comms erupted with chaos, shouts, cheers, disbelief. In the tower, cadets leapt to their feet, cheering wildly. Even the instructors, their pride bruised, could not help but clap, some shaking their heads in awe. The general said nothing at first. He simply watched as the Talon sat on the runway, steam rising from its engines, lightning flashing behind it like the backdrop to a legend. Then finally he spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of judgment. "She did it." Elena slowly unstrapped, her body trembling, her heart refusing to slow. She opened the canopy and rain immediately drenched her, washing away the sweat, the fear, the doubt. She looked out at the runway lights, at the rows of figures running toward her in disbelief, and for the first time in her life she felt the truth she had chased for years. She was not invisible. She was not overlooked. She was a pilot, one who had faced the impossible and flown through it. The Talon hissed beneath her, cooling, alive but at peace, as though it too knew its story had been rewritten. Together they had defied the odds. Together they had returned. The hangar was still vibrating with the echoes of applause when Ava walked back into the quiet corridors of the base. Outside, reporters were waiting, their cameras flashing, their pens ready to carve her name into the headlines of the morning. But for the moment she needed silence. She needed to breathe. The exhilaration of victory was still coursing through her veins, yet it was layered with exhaustion, a bone-deep fatigue that came after hours of adrenaline. She pushed open the door of her quarters, sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her hands. They were still trembling, not from fear but from the sheer intensity of what she had accomplished. She had done the impossible. She had taken off in the jet no one dared to fly, and she had brought it back unbroken. But in the silence, doubts crept in. Her victory had silenced critics, but she knew how quickly admiration could turn into envy. The generals would celebrate her today, but tomorrow they would ask themselves if she was too bold, too unpredictable. She had seen it before in the eyes of her fellow pilots, admiration mixed with resentment. Ava was not naive enough to think the battle was over just because she had flown once. The machine she had tamed was still considered a beast, a symbol of human limits. One success was a miracle. But what came next? A knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Commander Hale, the man who had watched her career from the sidelines with a mixture of skepticism and protective caution. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, but for the first time there was a softness in his expression. "You realize what you've done out there?" he asked quietly. Ava nodded but didn't speak. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "They'll want you to do it again. And again. They'll push you until either the jet or you breaks. You need to be ready for that." Ava met his gaze. "Then let them push," she said, her voice steady. "If I can do it once, I can do it again. And if it breaks, then at least we'll know where the line is." Hale studied her for a long moment, then gave a faint smile. "That's what scares them most. You're not afraid of failure. You're not afraid of limits." He shook his head. "But I'll tell you this, don't let them make you into a symbol they can control. Right now you're not just a pilot. You're a headline. A hero. They'll try to use that." His words lingered with her long after he left. Ava knew he was right. Already requests for interviews were pouring in. The military wanted to present her as the face of progress, the living proof of what determination and innovation could achieve. But Ava had not flown for glory or recognition. She had flown because she believed in her own skill, in the possibilities hidden inside the jet. To her, it was never about the world watching. It was about proving, if only to herself, that fear could be mastered. The next morning, the base was transformed into a parade ground. Rows of soldiers stood at attention as Ava was called forward to receive a medal. The general pinned it on her uniform while photographers snapped pictures. She stood tall, composed, but inside she felt strangely detached, as though she were watching herself from a distance. Applause thundered across the hangar, yet she kept thinking back to the cockpit, to the silence of the sky, where no medals or cameras mattered. That was the place where she felt most herself. As the days passed, Ava's life became a whirlwind. Every evening was an interview, every morning another meeting with engineers and scientists who wanted to know exactly what she had felt when the jet roared to life under her control. They asked about the pressure, the controls, the way the machine seemed to fight her and then surrender. She told them what she could, but deep down she knew there were things words could never capture. The instinct, the split-second decisions, the way her very heartbeat had aligned with the machine. Yet not everyone was celebrating. Some of her fellow pilots avoided her in the mess hall, their conversations falling silent when she entered. She caught whispers behind her back. "She got lucky. She'll kill herself next time. The machine flies her, not the other way around." Ava ignored them, but their jealousy only strengthened her resolve. She had never asked for their approval and she didn't need it now. One evening she returned to the hangar where the jet was kept. It sat gleaming under the harsh white lights, as menacing and beautiful as ever. She ran her hand along its metallic skin, feeling the cold beneath her fingertips. "They call you impossible," she whispered. "But we know better, don't we?" For a moment she almost felt the jet breathe back, as if it remembered her, as if it was waiting for her return. Standing there, Ava realized something profound. This was not the end of her journey, it was only the beginning. Flying the jet once had proven her courage, but flying it again and again would prove her mastery. And beyond that, she saw a future where fear no longer dictated what humanity could build or attempt. She saw skies filled with machines like this, piloted by those willing to push beyond limits. She wanted to lead that future, to make sure no one else was silenced, overlooked, or dismissed the way she once was. As she turned away from the jet, her reflection gleamed on its surface, strong, unyielding, and utterly unafraid. The world might try to control her story, but Ava knew her truth. She wasn't just the pilot who flew the impossible jet. She was the one who dared when everyone else stood still. And that, she realized, was only the first flight of many yet to come. The roar of the engine still echoed in Amelia's chest as she stepped down from the jet, her boots pressing against the tarmac with a steady resolve. Around her, the air buzzed with disbelief, celebration, and a touch of awe. Soldiers clapped her on the back, mechanics shouted her name, and even the hardened generals, those who had once dismissed her as an afterthought, now looked at her with something new in their eyes: respect. Yet for Amelia, the victory was not in their applause. It was in the proof she carried within her heart, that courage had spoken louder than fear, and skill had overcome doubt. But her moment of quiet triumph didn't last long. The base commander hurried toward her, a grim look cutting across his face. "We've intercepted enemy transmissions," he said, his voice clipped and urgent. "That was only the beginning. They're preparing a counteroffensive, larger than anything we've seen before. And they know about the jet." The weight of his words settled heavily in the air, silencing the crowd. Amelia understood immediately. The flight she had just accomplished was not the end of her battle, but the start of something far greater. That night, as darkness cloaked the airfield, Amelia sat alone inside the hangar, the jet looming behind her like a restless beast. She traced her fingers along its sleek metallic surface, feeling the hum of possibility beneath her touch. She thought of her father, the man who had designed the very aircraft now entrusted to her hands. She remembered his stories about chasing impossible